everybody. Welcome to our continuing celebration of faculty career colloquia. So usually when I introduce our speaker, I like to give about a 1-minute description of what this program is. It's a program that was put in place a little bit more than a year ago. And it basically involves faculty who become full professors. Every 7 years, participate in this program and basically get a chance to share with their colleagues and the community their experiences as a faculty member. And it gives them a chance to plan for the next 7 years. And so today, we're very happy to have Dean Leah Jamieson, who will be our speaker. I don't think I will go through a lengthy introduction because you all know her. But I just want to say that we were really happy that she agreed to do this. We all know, we're all busy, but she's really, really busy. And so we thought it was really great that she agreed to do it so that we all get a chance to really hear her story. And so with that, I'll let her take over.
So thank you. And I'm going to start with a few thank yous to some people who are in the room and some who aren't. The celebration of faculty careers process, Claude mentioned, backing up a little bit more even, this grew out of one of the strategic plan road mapping teams from the College of Engineering Strategic Plan from several years ago. And that team was looking at this general area of faculty careers about what we say we value, and then how that plays out. And the work is not done of thinking about how that plays out. For example, for assistant to associate professors, we have new track of Faculty of Engineering practice. But this was a process and a structure that came out of that road mapping team. And I think what you will see is that this is fairly different from normal seminars. I hope it will be different from a normal seminar. But I want to thank there were 4 members of that team, and I think 2 of them are here. So Kathy Howe, Alyssa Panich were part of that, and then the other 2 people were Jim Litzter and Monica Ivantis-Sanova for really creating something that is quite different in how we think about this. And the other thank yous go to Claude for organizing this, for running the pilot, for running last year, getting it started, keeping it going, participating, and to Marcia over there for her work in providing all the support for this. And so that's what this is. So it is not a typical seminar. I will tell you that far more than I would like, I do get asked to talk about myself in some way. At any point in time, and the topic will depend on the year, but I would, over the course of my career, been delighted to talk with any of you about speech recognition, parallel processing, epics, women in computing, a whole bunch of things. But the requests are to talk about your leadership trajectory, talk about your career, talk about your path, tell us what, the one that I maybe knew the least what to make of, Beth is here somewhere, the Women in Engineering Mentors and Mentees program a few years ago asked me to be their keynote speaker for Women's History Month. I thought, I'm not sure how to interpret that, but we had fun. It was good. But I am going to be talking about myself, and in the course of that I'll talk at a very superficial level about speech processing and parallel algorithms and epics and women in computing and related things. But I've enjoyed putting this together, and I plan on having a good time today, and I hope that you will enjoy it as well. So, this worked a few minutes ago. There it goes. And now it's not. I know why. This I put this back together. Technology's a really tough act. Okay, there we go. So 3 pieces. I'm going to give a chronological view of my career. That's pretty straightforward and not creative. I'm going to tease that apart into a thematic view, which is much more along the lines of what, if I think about this, what does it look like, and potentially what does that mean to me? And then one of the components of the celebration of faculty careers is very explicitly talk about, well, what comes next? What are the next 7 years going to look like? And so I will address that some. So simple chronology, and if you look at this, this is a pretty straightforward chronology, and in fact I have done mentoring workshops with young women in computing PhD students who will come up to me afterwards and say, this is not useful. You went to college, you went to grad school, you got your PhD, you got a faculty position, you were an assistant professor, you were an associate professor, you were a full professor, you did some administrative things. This is not what my life looks like. So, you know, I love meeting you, but I'm going to go talk to that person over there who actually has led a much tougher life. And yeah, it's been a pretty, in many ways, traditional. Probably the least traditional thing in there is, in fact, that I did become dean with a very short stint as interim head of ECE, but never having been head of a school. The other thing, if we step way back, is perhaps not traditional, is that I was the first and only person in my family to go to college. So I'm a first-generation college graduate. And so this was not growing out of a family history or a family culture of this. It gets a little messier if we look inside. So if I start, these are 7-year cycles Claude mentioned. I think what we're seeing with almost everyone, once we're in steady state, I do believe people will look 7 years back and some years forward. I think pretty much all of us say, this is the first time, I'm not going back 7 years. You know, 7 years, I was dean 7 years ago, so it becomes less interesting for one thing. But you go back pretty much as far as you want. Ed Delp went back to when he was born. I'm not going quite that far back, but you know. Claude and I also have the distinction of probably being the 2 people, and Marcia, who have the 3 people who have seen every single one of these. So there is that as well. Bachelor's degree in math from MIT, but literally every semester, sometimes twice a semester, I would get out my pad of quad-ruled paper and I would list out the majors that maybe I was interested in, what the core requirements were, and which options I still had open, because I did not know what I wanted to do. There was this thread of math. Physics was sometimes ahead of math, sometimes behind. There were a few others in there. Ultimately, computer science, towards the very end, started becoming of interest, and I was nowhere near having the requirements for that, but actually got pretty close by the time I graduated. But ultimately did get a degree in math. I will say that in addition to the math, physics, maybe computer science thread, that except for not having written an undergraduate thesis, I also did have all the qualifications to get a bachelor's degree at MIT, what would have been called humanities, either in literature or in music. So positive term, a lot of breadth, maybe less complimentary, a lot of indecision. But that was the path. My PhD when I started the electrical engineering department at Princeton. By the time I graduated, it was the electrical engineering and computer science department at Princeton. Initially focused primarily in algorithms, taking coursework almost entirely on the computer science side of that department. A dislocation when my major professor left to go to industry, and some regrouping and saying, okay, well, what do I really want to do? And the algorithms, I loved algorithms, but I really loved working with this particular professor, and said, I'm going to back up, think about what I want to do. Came back with a proposal to do research in computer music. Some amount of just terror on the committee's part, and a negotiated solution, which was to work in speech processing. Bell Labs was incredibly active in speech processing at that time, very reputable signal processing work going on. My advisor would become Ken Stieglitz, who was part of those early days founding of digital signal processing. Same techniques, same methodologies, but more within the department's comfort zone than computer music was. And I've enjoyed speech processing, so this is good, and I will try to give you some sense of why. So research that was moving more and more into signal processing and electrical engineering, but the coursework background solidly computer science. And then I came to Purdue, initially work entirely in speech recognition, speech processing, signal processing, but ironically, coursework primarily in teaching courses in computer engineering, and occasionally a graduate course in speech processing, and then eventually moving into parallel algorithms research for some practical reasons. So I'm going to break this into threads. First thread is research, which is a thread that most of you will find very familiar. So my dissertation was in what's called voiced unvoiced classification. So you're going to help me here. You need to put your hands, your thumb and a finger on either side of your throat, and just for a while go just hiss, okay? Now instead of an S, go zzz, so it's a buzz saw. Zzz. It sounds different. Does it feel different? You're not doing it. Does it feel different? Okay. During the zzz sound, your vocal cords are vibrating. It's called voiced excitation. It is a periodic excitation for those of you who are in signal processing. It is a beautifully periodic signal. The S is a noise signal, looks like random noise. Why do we care about this? Okay, try this again. Just go back and forth. Assure, Azure. Assure, Azure. Assure, Azure. It should feel different. You can tell pretty easily. The zh is voiced, the sh is not. If I have a sentence that I'm not sure what it is, or I'm recognizing speech and I want to know, did I say Assure or did I say Azure, the clue you're going to get is by that one classification, those differences in those sounds. The waveform up here, it's a segment, but it says a year of speech. A year of speech. P doesn't give you much to work with, the speech. So a year of speech, a year of beach. I don't know what that means, but you could say it. A year of beach, a year of beach, a year of speech. P-b. Think about what your mouth is doing. Your mouth's not doing anything very different when you go p or b. The difference is what's happening in your vocal cords. So you got to be able to tell if the vocal cords are working or not. And so the research that I tackled very much from an algorithms point of view, a lot of techniques in linear programming, optimization, pattern recognition, eventually some neural networks, but in the dissertation, can we classify speech as either voiced or unvoiced? And at that time, and for many, many years to come, had the highest accuracy voiced unvoiced classifier simply anywhere. About halfway into my dissertation, I learned that two very well-known research, Vishnu et al. And Larry Rabiner, were working on this problem at Bell Labs with all of the resources that Bell Labs in the 70s had to throw at things, and so this was good. And expanded to say, well, what happens if there's some sounds that have both voiced, they're mixed excitation, one of the very first mixed excitation classifiers out there. And then subsequent research at Purdue with my students and at various points in time, the highest accuracy classification of stop consonants, p, b, t, d, k, stop g consonants, with work with Sarah Yoder. Using recurrent neural networks with Rasheen Chen, the highest accuracy recognition of phonemes, all phonemes in English language. And throughout this work, really a focus on determining what are the limits on accuracy and performance? How well can you do this? The downside of this work, very computationally intensive. We were running, a minute of speech would run hours of computer time. So real-time applications, not going to happen. And so our focus was not so much on building a practical speech recognizer, but on saying, how well can you do this so that as algorithms are progressing, you get a sense of, are we limited by the time that's being spent, the quality of the signal, the quality of the microphone, or the fundamental that, you know what, you can't do any better than this. And so a lot of focus there. Very early modeling of co-articulation. Co-articulation in speech is that if I say a bunch of words, the sounds from one word bleed into the next word. And so if you look at the waveform again, there's not a break between successive words. And so one of the problems for a speech recognition system is that it doesn't know where the word ends and begins and ends. And so you can start labeling phonemes, and then you got to turn these into words, and you have to turn them into sentences, and you don't even know, well, what's the beginning and the end? It's all there. Probably the classic example in this, I'm going to say a sentence, you're going to tell me what it says or what it means. In mud eels are, in clay none are. All right, there's one person in there. My daughter knows what it is because she's grown up hearing this. Other than that, anybody know what that was? In mud eels are, in clay none are. It's all co-articulation. In mud, eels are, in clay, none are. Some of us would quibble that it should be none is, but this is the classic sentence. And Paul Harvey's speech is really easy to recognize because you got a pause after every word. But we did actually some of the earliest work in modeling co-articulation so that you could then use that to try to improve what you were doing in the speech recognizer. When Mary Harper arrived at Purdue, and her expertise was in natural language processing, so she did not deal with speech waveforms. She dealt with printed text. I have text, this is what it says. Can the computer give me an interpretation, a graphical representation of what that text said? Things go in and out of fads in schools, but some of us grew up diagramming sentences. Can you diagram the sentence? Can you tell which is the noun, what's the verb, what's modifying what's the structural relationship among the parts? And that's really the role of natural language processing. But ultimately, if you're building a speech recognizer, sometimes you just want a speech recognizer so that you can transcribe, so that instead of writing or typing, I can talk to something and I get back a great transcription. But there are a lot of applications, and one of the earliest classic ones was airline travel reservations, if you would dare trust yourself to a computer to make your travel reservations. One of the early application areas was a travel reservation system developed jointly with American Airlines, where you actually had to know the meaning. If it said, to Indianapolis from Boston is not the same as from Indianapolis to Boston. And so you've got to figure out the structural, you want to know, am I canceling the reservation, am I making the reservation, am I changing the reservation? So you actually have to understand the sentence. And that's natural language processing would take text for that. The problem with speech when you do that is that you probably have errors in the transcription that you're handing off to the natural language processor. You may have said, I want to go to the beach, and it came back and it said, I want to go to the beach, and now it's trying to find reservations to take you to Georgia. So you have to actually account for the fact now that you're dealing with an imperfect input. The good news is you can put probabilities on almost everything that you do in the speech recognition, so you can turn it into a stochastic process, you can model it stochastically, but instead of just taking a sentence and saying noun, verb, direct object, now you have to figure out where was the co-articulation, where are the words, what are the word alternatives at any point in time, so you get into a lot of work a lot of graph theory, a lot of graphical representation. This is a 3-word sentence. This is the dog eats. That's a, if you figure a 10-word sentence, it looks a lot messier. But all the tagging and labeling on that are ways of saying, this is how sure we are of this alternative hypothesis. And then you build a graph in the middle, and you try to figure out what is that interface in the middle between the speech recognizer, the natural language processor. What does that interface space look like? And this was many, many years of research with Mary Harper, George Allen from Audiology and Speech, Amy Supernome from Psychology, and then a group of really great students. Stochastic modeling, graph theory, constraint satisfaction, language modeling, and so for us, trying to bring as many diverse tools to this problem as we could. So there's a speech processing part, which I loved and still love. One of the things great about speech processing research is you could talk to anyone about it at any time, and you could actually, they could say, what do you do? And you could talk about it, and it was really a lot of fun. The field, recognizing how hard this labeling stuff was, ultimately took off in the direction of modeling everything stochastically. Model the sounds stochastically, don't try to put phoneme labels on them, model templates stochastically, model sentence structures stochastically. So I actually put my phone away so that I wouldn't do things while I'm talking. But if you talk to Siri, it is using completely stochastic models to recognize speech. And so, this work still stands as, benchmarking. How well can you do this? There's obviously a resurgence of interest recently in how does the brain work? And so this is starting to drift back a little bit because we're not only asking how can you build a speech recognizer, but there is a lot of interest in saying, can we understand how the brain works? Because right now, Siri does not understand speech the same way that humans understand speech. And we still don't have that great a handle on how humans do this. So there's an interesting change of paths perhaps in the making. The speech work, some theory in it, but a lot of experimentation at a time when computers were slower. I was working with very large data sets, and at some point in a moment of extreme pragmatism said, publishing one paper a year, because that's how long it takes to do an experiment, debug it, everything else. This is not good for a faculty career, and I really love being a faculty member. So I'm going to go back to my first love, which was algorithms, which is much more in my head, doesn't depend on how fast or slow the computer is or how many cycles I can get on it, and explicitly not walking away from speech work, but started layering in some algorithms work, but explicitly focused on parallel algorithms, which were starting to become a thing. Parallel algorithms. I have a big problem, and my field at this point was signal processing. I have a very structured problem. I can't run it fast enough, and I knew that firsthand from all the experiments I was doing. But it's got a lot of structure. So suppose I have a computer architecture that has, in theory, thousands of processors, and I've got really big problems. I can map pieces of the problem onto the processors. Maybe if you have 1,000 processors, you put 1,000th of the problem on each processor, and how much faster can I run? The challenge is obviously that I may be running over here, but I need something that happened over there. So there's this whole communication piece that is inherent in this. The computers that I was looking at the time had very structured communication networks, very different from cloud computers today that are much more distributed and irregular in structure. But the question, again, in many ways was an optimization problem. How can you intelligently do the mapping of problem pieces to processors? What do you do locally? And then how do you communicate, and how efficiently can you communicate? Those are the main parts. I'm going to just briefly talk about one example, which is the fast Fourier transform, because it is at the heart of signal processing, but also because some of the work we did to me just was really, really interesting. And so this is a one-dimensional, this is a one-dimensional FFT. It's called a butterfly diagram. The butterfly is saying you take the point, one of the points, another point, you bring them together, you do some stuff, you send them out, and you keep, doing this. This is a very small problem. It's 16 points. If you're doing something with 1,000 points or 512 points, the graph is obviously messier. A ton of work done on how do you parallelize FFT algorithms well, including by me and my students. But we started looking at the even more computationally intensive problems. What if instead of working on speech, you're working on images? Because speech is a one-dimensional signal. I may have 1,024 points compared to an image which has maybe 1,024 pixels in the horizontal direction, 1,024 in the vertical direction. So now I have a square image, and I have, instead of 1,024 points, I have 1,024 squared points. The algorithms are more computationally intensive. And to do an FFT, a lot of work again, saying, well, how can you map this messy structure, get the communication to work? And for us, what was just incredibly fun, and the reason I picked this out of all the possible examples, is to say, forget about doing the butterflies in a parallel way. You do an FFT on the rows of the image, you do an FFT on the resulting columns, and now you've got your two-dimensional FFT. You don't have to map the butterflies. Every row, you have one row of the image in one processor. Use your best serial FFT, best sequential FFT, do 1,024 of them in parallel at the same time. And so with literally perfect speed up, you have completed all the rows. Now you've got a problem. You've got your B matrix over here that it's oriented, this is not the FFT of that, but it's oriented by rows. And now I want to do an FFT on the columns of the B. So mathematically, I want to transpose the matrix. And just flip it around so that now a processor has a column of B, a row of B transform. Do the same thing. So the computations, perfect speed up. Your cost is how much does it cost you to do the transpose? And working with Phil Miller, who was a PhD student, a provably optimal transpose that was far less expensive than any of the mathematical computations you were doing. And it's a simple, ultimately it's simple. People have been banging their heads against the parallel butterfly structured FFTs for images for a long time. For me, probably one of the reasons this sticks in my mind is because my major professor was meeting with him one time at a conference, and he looked at it and he said, it never occurred to me you could do that. And for all of you who've had major professors, to be a few years out from your PhD and have your major professor tell you that you had done something that he just said, wow. So this was good. A lot of different kinds of algorithms. Susanna Tombush is here. We work together on a lot of things. Susanna and Ed Delp and I work together. A number of students work together. And algorithms where in one case we were able to get a better than linear speed up. So we had n processors, but you could have a speed up that was greater than n by some very tricky choices of what you did in the course of the algorithm. Direct applications to speech, fastest, part of hidden Markov modeling, which is one of the stochastic techniques that is now the foundation of everything, but the fastest training algorithms. And finally, some role in the community, working with 3 colleagues at Purdue, editing a book on this, running a workshop for NSF, and starting to say, okay, what is the bigger picture? Because there probably is a bigger picture. So instead of looking at one algorithm at a time, what are the software tools that you can build to help generalize this? How do you integrate this with operating systems? Co-organizing a Department of Energy sponsored taxonomy of parallel algorithms work, because the field was starting to mature beyond the here's my algorithm. It's like, well, tell me something more general about it. Don't just say, here's my algorithm. Tell me how this fits into a bigger scheme. And so really just a lot of good collaborations around that, my own work in characterizing parallel algorithms. Again, computational complexity, graph theory comes back here as well as in speech, but also compilers, operating systems, and a lot of pretty traditional computer things. So there's this research phase, starting with speech processing as a grad student, layering in parallel algorithms and software, and that comes to thread 2. And thread 2 is an education thread. This is a snapshot. I was, as I said, assistant professor at Purdue. I was actually hired as a group of 6 people to build a computer engineering program. Computer engineering, Purdue had the first computer sciences department in the country. Computer engineering was starting to grow up both at Purdue and other places, and so in one fell swoop, 6 of us were hired. This sounds vaguely familiar when you think about some of the things going on now, to create this. And the good news is we did. There was a bachelor's. Originally, it was a combined degree, computer engineering and electrical engineering. Students had to fulfill the requirements for both, and the degree had to be accredited by both accreditation boards in 1983, and then by about 10 years later, the computer engineering broke off to say this is a field in its own right, and students, it's a lot of work to do both degrees, basically. So the one less traditional thing here is that this is not how an assistant professor is typically brought in to spend their time. You are here to establish your research program, to run fast, and 5 assistant professors and 1 tenured associate professor were here to do all that, but also to build a degree program. And so it I think, shaped my perspective of a faculty career, that there are differences in what you can do. EPICS, first offered in 1995, so 19 years ago. I was the associate dean for undergraduate education in 2004, and under that we launched the Engineer of 2020 effort with Jim Jones and a really great committee that included not only faculty from across the college, but actually a couple of really outstanding alums, Tom Malott and Joel Spira, who were really at the heart of saying, what does the future of engineering education look like? And we continue to play this out. Let me go over here. Just a few sidebars. As a result of some of this building a curriculum, opportunities to work with John Lindenlaub, and we in the, there's a year on there, 1983, an interactive testing environment to test computer programming skills, so a very non-traditional teaching environment quite a long time ago. Purdue used to have something called Corn Camp. This was part of the summer recruiting efforts, would bring students to campus to get excited about Purdue, saying, you want to come to Purdue, let us show you cool things that are happening. I got tagged one year to do the ECE component of Corn Camp. This was 1994. For calibration, the Mosaic, the first widely known at all web browser, was launched in 1993. Alta Vista, which had some lifespan, 1995. Internet Explorer was 1995. Google was 1997. So this is 1994, and I decided that this web stuff looked pretty cool. I had no idea what it was. I had never used a web browser. But if I wanted to excite high school students about coming to engineering at Purdue, this seemed like a pretty good hook. So we configured a computer lab. We did the software downloads. We figured out how to do this, gave them sample scripts, figured out protection mechanisms to restrict where they could go on the web. But it was a lot of fun. So EPICS is there. I actually am going to say a few more words about EPICS. It is more than one word on one slide in a long talk, because EPICS in my career and in my life was, and will continue to be a big deal. I'm going to actually start with some of the arm's length perspective on what EPICS has been, what it has, how it has been viewed, places beyond Purdue. We received the National Academy's Gordon Prize for Innovation in Engineering Education, Ed Coyle, Bill Oakes, and I. National Science Foundation Directors Award for Distinguished Teaching Scholars. Indiana Professor of the Year. Got to go on the football field. That was fun during a game. ASCE Chester Carlson Innovation Award with Ed Coyle, actually in 1997, so very early on. Anita Borg Institute, and I'll come back and talk about that, but a Woman of Vision Award for Social Impact. IEEE Emberson Award is for contributions to IEEE's technical activities, and the recognition here was actually for EPICS. EPICS, a year ago, was recognized by the National Academy of Engineering as an exemplary program in real-world engineering education. And you know, some of these numbers, I stopped at 2006 because when I became dean, I resigned as director of EPICS. But in that period there, almost $11 million in external funding and 29 papers. Both numbers have gone up in the 8 years since then. And to date, and so this is from 1995 on, over 20,000 university students have participated in EPICS, not only at Purdue, but around the world, and 11,000 high school students, mostly high school, but K-12 students. And so this is, if I think about things I've done, this was a big deal. A lot of people, and so this is really a short list of people who played a really pivotal role in this, but in addition to this, you know, dozens of faculty, thousands of students, some alums, including some donors, who, for whatever reasons of their own, helped us solve problems, got a sense of what we were trying to do, and said, yeah, go do it. I will say that most of my colleagues, so segment one, theme one was, the thread one was research. Most of my colleagues in both the parallel algorithms community and the speech community, and I would go to conferences and I was doing research, and I'd tell them about this, and the single most common reaction was, with a very sincere look, well, is it taking time away from your research? And I'd go, yeah. And they'd say, well, that's too bad. And I would, depending on who it was, either to myself or out loud, say, you know, actually it's not. We're doing something really good here. And yeah, it's taken time away from my research, but it's worth it. But it is a, you know, this is introspection about careers. There were some pretty in-your-face challenges. It's like, why are you're doing this? You're doing less speech processing. Why would you do this instead? So as we play out the celebration of faculty careers, if you hear me sounding fairly passionate about saying there are multiple paths, there is not one faculty career, it's because I truly believe that, and you know, I think I've sort of lived that. So timeline, so speech processing, parallel processing, there's this education, the work with John Lindenlaub back here, but then EPICS, Engineer 2020, you know, there's a line here where clearly things happened after this. Still follow these, pay a lot of attention to them, but I am not leading them in any sense of the word at this point. So thread number 3, IEEE. Pretty long history. I think, I actually haven't, if I went and opened boxes, I could find something that would tell me the date of this, but that was a step too far. I think that my first volunteer role in IEEE was as one of the editors of the IEEE Acoustic Speech and Signal Processing Society newsletter. It was a little, you know, either 4 or 8 page newsletter that came out a few times a year. Hard copy got mailed out to members of the Acoustic Speech, now the Signal Processing Society, which is easier to say. And this came about around 1980, so I was at Purdue maybe 4 or 5 years after my PhD, and I got a phone call from Al Oppenheim, who was a professor at MIT. That is an understatement. I think every one of our fields has a handful of people who you think of as being the founders, the luminaries, the people who helped create the field or at the top of the field. Al Oppenheim was one of those people. Oppenheim and Schaefer was a famous book, and Al Oppenheim called. And he didn't send an email first to say, could we talk, because there was no email to send. And he said, well, I'm really involved with the Signal Processing Society, and we would like to get some new people involved with the newsletter. Would you be willing to be one of the newsletter editors? I'm like, sure. What do I have to do? And then little by little, working it backward to figure out that he knew my advisor, he knew my major professor. In some conversation, Ken said, one of my students is on the faculty at Purdue. I think she's doing good work. I assume that's what he said. There may have been another layer that played in, because the first time I went to a conference was with my advisor, which was 1975. We went to, it was an IEEE Aerospace Electronics Conference. It was actually a speech processing topic. It was in Washington, so we took the train from Princeton, from Trenton to Washington, and we got to the conference. And my advisor, after we were there for about a day, said, you know what? I never noticed this before. There are hardly any women here. I'm like, well, yeah, I kind of noticed it when we got here. But I do think that played in his mind in some way of saying, oh, young female professor in a field. I like her work. She was responsible when she was a graduate student. I could recommend her to the leaders in the Signal Processing Society. And so I just kept doing more stuff in Signal Processing Society, and I eventually was president of the society, moved from there to what's called IEEE Technical Activities. It is a board of 60 people, society presidents and leaders. Melba Crawford, who is not here today, is currently a society president in technical activities. Vice president of publications, because academics do publishing. And then 2007, I was actually the IEEE president and CEO, and am currently the president of the IEEE Foundation, which is the philanthropic arm of the IEEE. And there were some themes in each of those. Strategic planning, how visible is signal processing, how visible is IEEE, how visible are our technical fields, how do you work across boundaries? When I was president, Signal Processing Society proposed a new transactions on multimedia and found 3 other IEEE societies going, well, wait a minute, we do multimedia, what do you mean you're going to have the transactions? And spent a year negotiating a 4-society co-sponsored transactions. But for me, continued learning experiences, that you can't just sit in your field, you gotta actually work with some other people sometimes. As president, a lot of strategic planning, because IEEE sort of would go this way, a new president every year, not much in the way of a plan, and so we spent a year and then a second year, because my successor just said, would you please keep doing this, of strategic planning. A lot of work on public visibility. I will say that one of the high points of my IEEE somewhat relationship was about a year ago, when on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, I was not watching, but I heard about it after the fact. On Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, one of the questions that they said was, by 2014, according to the IEEE, Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, which of the following will be unnecessary? And they had some choices. The right answer was driver's license. But the fact that, who wants to be a millionaire, and we can say, IEEE says this. This is actually an outgrowth of the public visibility work. How do you connect not only with the technical field, but how do you connect with the popular world? And that was one of the ways it has played out and continues to play out. And the start of some humanitarian discussions. IEEE has 400,000 members, absolutely well known for publications and conferences, some known for professional development and networking communities locally. But if you look at the world today, and if you look at young IEEE members, they're saying, what about power to the world? What about clean water for the world? What about electrification? What about telecom? How have cell phones built economies in places that never had landlines? And so this real intensity of saying that we're here and we're publishing and we're doing research and we're teaching and we're going to conferences. What role does IEEE have in this well-being of the world part of the equation that isn't going to say, how do you use the highest, fastest, newest technology? How do you use the most affordable technology in practical situations? And so that was a conversation we started, continued to play out. And one of the things I will absolutely say I am proudest of, and it's not widely known that there's a connection here, but I do know there's a connection. IEEE's tagline since 2009 has been IEEE Advancing Technology for Humanity. And this was an outgrowth of public visibility, strategic planning, what are our core values, what do we think we can do, and how do we connect with the world? And it will change because IEEE changes its taglines about every 10 years. But for me, that's a piece of it that has meant a great deal. Any of you who went to my talk when I interviewed for Dean will recognize the questions there, because the question then, unlike the EPIS question, are you doing less research? The question then was, how can you possibly be Dean and President of IEEE? And it really is captured in the upper right there. The questions are the same. What are emerging technical areas, and how do you identify them? How does IEEE identify where to start new transactions, build new technical communities? How does Purdue Engineering, maybe decide where to make investments in preeminent teams? What are the processes? What are the technical areas? How do you work across boundaries? How do people work, learn what's happening in publishing, what's happening in education, what's the role of technology in publishing, what's the role of technology in education, what does it mean to be global? And so this is all, the questions are very similar, so a lot of interplay. For me, the other thing that I would say is absolutely significant about IEEE, it is one of my communities. It has been a community that has provided friends, colleagues, connections around the world, and continues to be a part of my life. Thread 4, we're on a home stretch here. Women in engineering. I was the third woman faculty member. There was a woman, Lillian Galbraith, 1930s, was here, and then there was a huge gap for like 35 years. But of the modern era, I was the third woman faculty member in engineering. This year, this academic year, we will have 73, right? Yeah, 73. So it's a big change. But it does mean, and I don't think I understood this earlier on, but over time has become more and more and more important to say this is important. It's why community became important to me. It's like, oh, you know, there's actually a community I don't have. And so working at Purdue, classroom climate workshops on gender equity, committee on the status of women, women faculty in engineering, first retreat in 1999. Dulcie's nodding, Kathy's nodding. Yeah, we spent a couple days together getting to know each other, and that committee still continues. Computing Research Association has a committee on the status of women. I was a co-chair at one point. Susanna has been very involved with CRAW. Anita Borg, Institute for Women in Technology. Just very quickly, so Anita Borg was a computer architect. She worked at Digital Equipment, and at some point decided she was far more interested in the success of women in places like Digital Equipment than she was in computer architecture. at Digital Equipment. Working with Telly Whitney, who was also a computer architect, Caltech PhD, decided to get a group of women together. It's like, what would it be like if we got together a whole bunch of women in technology? Because we're all spread out, and there aren't that many of us in any one place. So they created a conference called the Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing. First conference was in 1994. It was in Washington, D.C. There must be a thing about Washington, D.C. and conferences. And I went. Okay, I'll try. I don't know what this is. Walked into a room where there were 450 women. Most of you can't in any way imagine what that felt like, because I had never been in that setting, and it was amazing. And so I became more involved in CRAW, I became more involved in Anita Borg Institute, and continue to be. These are amazing organizations. CRAW and its collective leadership, all of us a few years ago, were awarded the Presidential Award for Excellence in Science, Math, Engineering Mentoring, the White House Award. Also won the National Service Board Public Service, National Science Board Public Service Award. And because of these activities, the Helen Schliemann Gold Medal. There are other Helen Schliemann Award winners in the room here. Teresa's back there, yeah. The Violet Haas Award, Claude is a recipient at one point in time in honor of that modern era engineering faculty at Purdue. Violet Haas was number one. Most recently, the YWCA Woman of Wisdom Award. I mention this simply because I feel this is very important because it gives me the right to be insufferable. I mean, somebody can challenge me and I can say, excuse me, I'm a woman of wisdom, so, just get over it. Tying it together with what was happening in signal processing, and for me, again, this was and is about community. Thread 5. There's only one more to go. Thought leadership, and again, more recently, but being active in national discussions, national reports, through the National Academy, through ASEE with Jack Lohman, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a current NRC, which is jointly National Academy of Science and NAE on completion of 2- and 4-year STEM degrees. So spanning public understanding, research enterprise, what's happening in education, and the ASCE one, what needs to happen in education, and again, great opportunities for collaborations, but also to think about these big picture problems. So we had research education, we add in IEEE, women in engineering and computing communities, thought leadership, and we move to the last thread, which is Dean. Okay, so this is an ongoing thread. I was interim dean starting in March of 2006. There is a time definite on this. The expected end of my term is July 2017. The Board of Trustees have said that is what they would like, and I said, thank you, that's great. A couple of landmark things, because we do a lot of stuff, but a lot of this is about is planning what you're going to do and how do you do it. So the strategic plan, which literally involved hundreds of people, many of you involved in this. Carolyn led the strategic planning effort, extraordinary people, global impact, and then turning that into a living document with this idea of 1 vision, 3 goals, and 4 stories. And then the opportunity for growth and integrating that with the strategic plan, the new document, a strategy for impact. I'm not going to talk about the college growth expansion. I have a PowerPoint on here, that's a whole other thing. We're not going to do that. Just a little bit from a perspective of what this looks like. Things I think about as dean. Purdue Engineering, what are we doing here? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? How do we do it well? How could we do it better? What's it going to mean? At the same time, what is the role, the position, the relationship, the connectivity graph for engineering, not as its own isolated bubble, but engineering at Purdue in this larger context? What is the role of engineering in the United States, but what's the role of Purdue engineering in the United States? What's the role of engineering in the world? What's the role of Purdue engineering in the world? And the questions The first handful look an awful lot like the IEEE questions, but then you get down here. You know, how do you build reputation? How do you plan? A lot of planning. How do you grow? Because we have this amazing opportunity for growth. But more importantly, how do you grow well? How do you transform? And ultimately, how do you lead? And I will just say that the how do you lead questions, of the things I get asked to talk about, that's probably the one that comes up most often. And I will simply note that there are dozens of models for leadership. The one actual framework for leadership that for me has been absolutely critical was something that was advocated, developed, articulated by Frank Green, who has master's in electrical engineering in 1962. He worked with Fritz Friedlander in EE. Serial entrepreneur, founder of New Venture Capital, New Vista Capital, focused on helping to support minority-owned and women-owned businesses, but would come back and talk about leadership with EPIC students, with some of the other students at Purdue, that said leadership is about three things. It's about vision, it's about relationships, and about execution. And you don't need to be more complicated to that. Vision is like, for me, is like falling off a log. It's like, yeah, that's where my head goes. But you have to be executing, and especially as we look at the growth, you've got to be executing well. And the only way you do this is by continuing to build and nurture the relationships. I would add a fourth piece, which is you got to communicate. You got to both speak, so from speech recognition to speaking out, you got to speak and you've got to listen. So threads, add in a dean thread. So just turn this on its side. What are the themes? What are the patterns? Not necessarily the chronology. Theme number one is about collaboration. If you ask me what has been the single best thing about my career, regardless of which thread, which time period, which anything else, it's the collaborations. Engineering is a team sport. And I have been fortunate to have some amazing teams. This is research collaborations. It's taken from roughly, but I will not promise it's 100% accurate because I just sort of did it by typing and looking and reading and typing. Co-authorships on paper. So these are research collaborations. A lot of students, but also you will see a lot of great faculty collaborations that have just extended over many, many, many years. But not just research collaborations. Collaborations through the engineering leadership team, through the right-sizing team that helped us figure out that growing was perhaps something that we should do well, the current strategic growth planning and implementation team, women in engineering, all of the IEEE collaborations, the women in engineering collaborations, and I know there are people missing there, but there are 2 blank spaces, not because that's the end of it, but because there is room for more. And this is really important. So second theme, parallel processing. In this case, not the how many processors do you have, what are your algorithms. Graphically, if you look at this, it is pretty clear that I am really not very good at saying, I'm going to do one thing and that's it, I'm doing it. It doesn't work that way. In the research, started with one research area, branched into a second. Education has been going on. I'm a professor, so I've been teaching. But when I say education, I mean not just teaching, which is what we do, but actually something where this is a major piece of the creative endeavor of what you're doing. And still over here, some of this. So parallel processing is critical. Balance is another, and maybe this is less obvious, but it actually is a derivative of the parallel processing. That presumably there's got to be some way of balancing these things. For me, balance has played out doing speech and parallel processing, research, teaching, and service, looking inward, but also having to look outward, looking at the big picture, the planning, which is like falling off a log, but also knowing that if you don't get the details right, the execution's not going to be very good, so having to figure out that balance. I will tell you the research, teaching, service one is the one that I mean, this is, I guess, an anecdote. So when I was coming up for promotion to full professor, and I was blessedly on sabbatical actually that year, so I wasn't here. This was all going on, and I didn't have to, worry about when the committees were meeting or who was doing what or who was saying what in the hallways. But after when the case hit the dean's office, Henry Yang called me and said, he said, I'm going to go to bat for your case. I think this is great. We're going to make this work. But I got to tell you, it looks like what you're doing is split about evenly between research, teaching, and service. And that's just not the profile of a successful faculty member. And so it was his heads up. It's like, this may or may not fly. I'm just, going to lower your expectations. So, and I actually went back, and he was right. It was about a third, a third, a third. Oh, well, that's interesting. And then I got promoted, and it was fine. But I have to say it was risky, because it wasn't a traditional path for a faculty member. Another piece of balance, career and family. For me personally, but I will say historically for women in engineering community, single biggest topic is career-family balance, but I think increasingly becoming a topic for all faculty, for all professionals. It's not a woman's issue, it's everybody's issue. And so it is a piece for me of this balance picture. At the same time, focus. Okay, so how can you have balance and focus? There have been some extreme intervals of focus, and certainly 3 of them. Epics was a period of focus, the strategic plan, and now the expansion. This is what I do. It's maybe hard to get me to talk about anything else on some days, but I'll try. I believe in change. A lot of these areas that I was in were actually pretty early in their lifetime as a technical area, or in the case of Epics, very early in its lifetime as anything. And I fundamentally believe this. I think you can be better. You can always look at what you're doing. You can think about how to challenge yourself. You can improve. You can be great. You can be greater. And you've got to believe in change and being willing to do that. And I really fundamentally believe that. It's played out in a whole lot of things across all of these threads. Engineer 2020, the IEEE Envision Future, National Academy, et cetera. If I just pare this down to the Purdue-centric things, the Epics, Engineer 2020, the plan, the expansion, the integrated, there's a really high correlation between most of those and this shift from balance to focus. And that's probably not a coincidence. These are big changes, and you've got to be focused. And so there is a correlation. And the other piece is that it plays directly into this model of leadership. How do you think about change, and how do you actually not only talk about change, but affect change? Theme number 6, as I was talking about what I did in IEEE, some of the things that we've done here, when I was elected president of the IEEE Foundation in its first ever contested election, so I had to give a campaign speech and answer questions, and one of the members of the foundation board raised his hand and he said, "Are you going to make us do strategic planning?" Okay. No, but we're going to turn the foundation upside down, which we've done, and that's okay. But we didn't do a strategic plan. We just turned it upside down, and it's going great. This is a fundamental thing, and this is I believe this. You have to, you have to think about a big picture. You have to have a vision for where you're going. There's a question. Is it your vision? Is it a collective vision? How do you make that happen? One of the things with the strategic plan, it was probably one of the most ambitious collective vision exercises done almost anywhere. And it's really, really important that if you're going to change, it's a lot better to have other people, having this be their idea of change, not just your own idea of change, and that's been really important. Communication is just, it's critical. You can speak, you can listen, and then you've got to be communicating, otherwise it doesn't go anywhere. And the last theme is actually community. that, you know, I talked about IEEE for me being a community, for the women in engineering, women in computing being important to me because they gave me community in a different way than my, you know, sitting in my office in the EE building or the Duncan Annex or the MSEE building, whatever time it was, did. And this is really important. And so this is a really broad view of community because I really did step back and say, well, okay, what communities have meant things to me? And some of these are obvious, you know, EPICS, IEEE, you know, United Way, it in general is not a huge part of my life except that I am the Purdue chair this year, but it embodies this principle that we have to be in a community and we have to support that community, and we're all part of supporting that community. Yesterday I wore my Live United t-shirt, but I decided not to wear it today. You know, the Convos, Artist's Own, Lafayette Symphony, and Scott, thank you for coming today. You know, to me, this is part of what makes this community one that is worth being in and living in. And I'm really happy to be in, not a creative way, but in some ways to be a part of their communities as well. And, you know, Columbia, I have the key to the city of Medellin, so it's a community as well. And then the last part for this is also community, is this very immediate. You know, shrink it down, all these other things. But for me, the foundation of all community is my family. I have maybe the pathologically world's smallest family. You know, I'm only child with grandparents who were only children for, you know, generations back. And so this is my family, and that is at the heart of my community. So what's next, really quickly, because I'm not good at this part. The career planning part has never been a strength. So the timeline became dean. We're now at September 14. There is a stop date on that. So if I think about what's next, I can really pretty easily divide it into two parts. There's the dean part, and it's pretty simple. How do we grow? How do we grow well? How do we transform? And that's what I'm, so if you ask me what am I doing for the next 3 years, that's what I'm doing. In the course of that, talking with a lot of you, talking with a lot of people at Purdue, outside Purdue, alums, students, faculty, how do we do this? Beyond that, it is my hope that the Shaping the Conversation thread is one that will just simply continue, because I think it is something where I can contribute and have had opportunities, and I don't see that depending on any structural things of what I'm doing. But will I go back and, you know, pick up a research career? Maybe, in some field. Will I be doing stuff in education? Maybe. Will be something completely different, and I really don't know. So that's where we are. Unexpected journey, an unplanned journey. And what I would like simply to say in closing is thank you, and thanks so many of you for being an integral part of it. So thank you. Sure.
You mentioned IEEE had a good way to communicate with people. That's like one of the women in IEEE.
Yeah.
What is the best way to communicate with ordinary people?
So, I mean, I will tell you, so the question, you know, IEEE I mentioned is communicating far beyond its technical boundaries and is, you know, working on, not all the way there, but getting more effective at communicating broadly. I will tell you that IEEE, under this public visibility effort that we launched, looked inside and said, we don't have a clue how to do this. And so we have worked with consultants since 2007, 2 different sets of consultants to help first build perception plans. And so there's every couple years now a survey that says what is the public awareness, so we can take stock of things. But then looking at the venues where it's relevant for technical people to be heard, but in the popular press, and so building up a very large, at this point, database of IEEE experts who are registered as experts in different things, who have said, time permitting, and I'll try to make it work that way, if you call on me, if you get, you know, a clearinghouse that says if somebody comes to IEEE and says, we heard that election fraud is going to be a really big deal with electronic voting in the upcoming midterm elections. Is there somebody who can talk about it? It doesn't take them 3 weeks to get in touch with people. They've got a database. They go to 5 people, say who's available, do it. So a lot of data management, a lot of very structured things, but then, and training for the volunteers who end up doing a lot. I mean, you know, I went and did media training in New York because I was going to be a spokesperson for IEEE. I've done interviews recently for possibly some stuff they're rolling out this fall on STEM education. But you know, tracking the hot topics, integrating it with things like IEEE Spectrum, which is a kind of a popular press thing to say, what are the topics likely to be of interest, and can we build our database of expertise in that? But then the consultants are the ones who have the media contacts, who you know, go out to Fortune magazine, go out to the TV networks. Yeah, so believe that there are people out there with expertise other than your own, and have them tell you how to do it. Yeah, and spend a lot of money. Yeah.
So it's a wonderful presentation.
Thanks, Jim.
First of all. Secondly, with 20/20 hindsight, if you look back through this long, beautiful career that you've had, is there anything that you would do differently?
Is there anything I would do differently? In terms of choices of things to do and work on and focus, probably not. In retrospect, I think I would have worked harder to finish one of the undergraduate theses in either music or literature. Not because I would have done anything with it, but I think it would have given me for me personally, a more tangible anchor, that I really was serious about that, and I continue to think of that. And maybe if I'd done that, I could have convinced, you know, Jeff Ullman and Ken Stieglitz and these guys at Princeton that computer music was a viable dissertation topic, which could have been pretty different. The other, and this isn't career related, and it's just something that comes with a lot of years of talking and speaking and things like that. One of the things I wish I could have done differently for the first, at least 10 years of my career at Purdue, figured out a way not to be terrified when I walked into the first class of the semester every year, over and over, because I was terrified. I just, it's like, oh my gosh, there are these people out there and I don't know them and they know stuff. The first class I taught was a graduate class, and it was okay, but it would have been more fun if I wasn't so scared at the start of every semester. And you know, now it's good. I don't get scared when I get up and talk, but yeah. Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah.
One of the things I find most amazing about your career is both that you chose to come to Purdue and you stayed at Purdue for.
Yeah.
Not in a good way, but I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure you've had lots of options and
Yeah.
things. Can you talk a little bit about how you chose to come to Purdue and then how you decided to stay at Purdue?
Sure. Yeah, no, why did I choose to come to Purdue? So I was doing research in speech processing, which is fundamentally a form of pattern recognition. Was looking for jobs, did not know if I wanted to go to industry or academia. There's probably a part of me that thought that the teaching part might be scary. So I interviewed at companies, I interviewed at universities, had offers from Bell Labs and Texas Instruments and some other places, had some university offers. Purdue at that time, so this is an electrical engineering department. Purdue had a computer sciences department, but interestingly, unlike how things played out almost everywhere else in the country, people doing pattern recognition, which was the, you know, at the heart of a lot of artificial intelligence, people like King-Sun Fu and Fukunaga and Kashyap, these guys, they were electrical engineers. They did not come out of the computer science world. So this pattern recognition piece was in electrical engineering at Purdue, and they were legendary. Even then, I mean, they were legendary. And so the opportunity to come here, work, not ever directly with them, but to know them and to share some resources and be in this environment was exciting. The thought of building a computer engineering program, because if you look at this as a grad student, I was doing research ultimately in signal processing, but my coursework had all been in computer science. And so it looked to me like, wow, you know, they're going to create a computer engineering program, but I can do electrical engineering research. This is actually a really good fit. And so that was probably more than anything. It wasn't the restaurants. I'll just put that out there. It wasn't the seafood. I grew up on the East Coast. But why did I stay? There has always been an opportunity here. I mean, Purdue has given me the latitude to do pretty much anything, not always, but a lot of what I wanted to do. I mean, you know, I got to work with some people early on, Steve Bass in signal processing, some of the other signal processing group, but wanted to work in parallel processing, could do that, could collaborate with colleagues in computer science. Working with John Lindenlaub in education was just a treat. And then when we started EPICS, I mean, you know, and Dick Schwartz, who was the head of ECE at the time, basically said publicly, so he knows that the story's out there, and he's heard me repeat it. You know, when Ed Coyle and I went and said, well, we want to do this. And his reaction was, well, this is a really crazy idea. There's not a chance in the world it can work. But they're both full professors, so what do they have to lose? And it, you know, but we could do it. And we got support, and every time we submitted a grant, somebody would come up with matching funds. And so, you know, why I've stayed, I mean, it's let me move on when I wanted to move on. It's let me stay with something when I wanted to stay on. So I never felt like I had to go anywhere else to be able to do that. So it's been good.
I have a harder one.
Okay.
You have a fan club that hoped you would be provost. What happened?
I was on the search committee. I wasn't eligible. No. In fact, I will tell you. Mitch called me. We were at a gas station between here and Martinsville before Christmas last year. To say, I have two questions I want to ask you. I don't know really how I want you to answer them. So any answer is okay, but I'm going to ask them both. He said, first, are you interested in being provost? And I said, no, and I'll come back to why I said no. He said, well, good, I think. Will you be on the search committee? I said, sure. And then he stopped and he said, but you know, and that's great. I really think I want you on the search committee, but if you think about it a little more and decide you'd like to be a candidate, I'll be your biggest fan. Let's go for it. Now, you timed your question after our provost had left. You didn't ask that while he was still in the room. But no, I think I'm deciding how tactful to be. There are two parts of this. One is that I actually do think there is something, and it's obviously not true for all, because there are women who are my age, my generation, who are university presidents, who are provosts. But I think for some of us, we have despite the math undergraduate degree, have so much become an engineer and have spent so much of our time not only doing engineering, but thinking about what it means to be an engineer and how do you make this a field that is welcoming for an incredibly diverse population of engineers, that to create distance between me and engineering isn't really where I want to be. I don't want to think about how can nursing recruit more men. And it's a problem they have. But for me, my heart is in what are we doing in engineering? How can we make engineering at Purdue be incredible, but how can we make this field be incredible? There is another less tactful part, which is if you really look at the provost, and not all people would agree with this, my personal view of provost, the provost gets all of the problems that are too difficult for the heads and the deans to solve. And gets the president's vision. So you solve really hard problems implementing somebody else's vision. This is not a good job. So it's actually never been of interest. And so if I were to ever say I had academic aspirations, if you ignored the first part, which is saying I love being in the engineering world, I probably would have tried pretty hard to figure out how to do this without ever being a provost. And there are, interestingly, more examples of women jumping from dean to president than there are of men. It's not where I'm looking to be, though, because I really love being in the engineering world. Barrett approves. Thank you.